At 60, the tragedy of Chris Rock is beyond heartbreaking. What if I told you that one of the funniest men alive has lived one of the saddest lives in Hollywood? At 60 years old, Chris Rock is a global icon. But behind the laughter hides a lifetime of pain, racism, poverty, betrayal, death, divorce, and the most humiliating moment ever broadcast on live television. He made the world laugh while silently breaking inside. This is not just a story about comedy, it's about survival. Before we uncover the heartbreaking truth behind his success, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence, and turn on notifications because what you're about to hear will change how you see him forever. 1. From silence to survival. The painful childhood that forged a voice. Chris Rock. Before the world ever laughed at his jokes, Chris Rock lived a childhood that felt more like survival than innocence. Born on February 7, 1965 in Andrews, South Carolina, he was the eldest of 7 children carrying responsibility before he ever understood the word. When his parents moved the family to Brooklyn during the 1970s, they dreamed of opportunity, but found themselves in a neighborhood filled with crime, poverty, and daily struggle. His father, Julius, worked 2 jobs as a truck driver and newspaper delivery man, coming home covered in sweat and exhaustion. His mother, Rosalie, split her days between preschool teaching and social work, often mending clothes at night under dim kitchen light. Love existed in that house, but it was quiet, unspoken, and heavy with sacrifice. At age 10, Chris was forced into a school across town due to desegregation. Instead of equality, he found torment. He was one of the very few black students in a predominantly white school, and what followed remains some of the darkest years of his life. He endured relentless bullying, racial slurs, physical attacks, and isolation. Some mornings he tightened his shoelaces so hard his fingers hurt, hoping the pressure would give him strength. He never told his parents. He carried the bruises home like hidden assignments and wore silence like armor. He once said, "I learned to be quiet because speaking made things worse." But pain has a strange way of shaping destiny. To protect himself, he began observing people, memorizing their rhythms, studying the timing of conversations. Humor became his shield. Every insult taught him about irony. Every long bus ride home trained his sense of timing. By 13, Chris had transformed survival into performance, turning fear into jokes just to stay sane. He started imitating teachers, exaggerating classmates, and using sarcasm to deflect humiliation. The same voice that once trembled in hallways began whispering truth disguised as comedy. Brooklyn's streets filled with smoke sirens and uncertainty became an invisible classroom. He watched hustlers negotiate, mothers stretch pennies, and neighbors survive with dignity and grit. These moments taught him something school never did. Laughter isn't just entertainment, it's medicine. It's defiance. It's power. By the time he stepped on stage for the first time, he wasn't just telling jokes. He was telling the truth, sharper, braver, and more honest than anyone else. His comedy was not born from joy. It was forged in pain. And that tragedy became the foundation of the voice that would one day change comedy forever. 2. Chasing the dream, struggles, hustle, and the Eddie Murphy breakthrough. Chris Rock didn't walk into fame. He crawled through years of cold nights, empty pockets, and invisible beginnings. At 18, he had no car, no connections, and no certainty. He lived in a tiny Brooklyn room where the radiator wheezed like an old man, and the silence felt heavier than the walls. He worked minimum-wage jobs, flipping burgers, sweeping floors, delivering food to offices filled with warmth he couldn't afford. Some nights he skipped dinner just to save enough money for a comedy club ticket. But he wasn't in the audience. He stood outside in the cold, listening through the walls to laughter he prayed would one day be his. His first performances took place in smoky basement clubs and low-budget open mics where the crowds were drunk and unforgiving. The microphones squealed, the lights flickered, and the pay was often just a free drink. He bombed countless times. Strangers booed him. Some walked out mid-set. Every rejection felt like a punch to his spirit. But he kept returning. "I wasn't trying to be funny," he later said. I was trying to stay alive. What made his journey even more brutal was that there was no safety net, no family money, no mentor, no plan B. Many nights he rode the subway until sunrise because he couldn't afford to go home. He wrote jokes on scrap paper while shivering in train stations, using humor to keep from breaking down. His determination became his lifeline. By 21, after years of obscurity, something extraordinary happened. One night at the legendary Catch a Rising Star Comedy Club, a man walked in wearing leather and confidence Eddie Murphy. Already a superstar, Murphy watched the skinny kid on stage who was still rough, still unpolished, but undeniably real. Instead of ignoring him, Eddie leaned in. He saw fire where others saw failure. That single moment changed everything. Murphy approached Chris after the show and offered him a role in Beverly Hills Cop 2, 1987. It was a tiny part, but a massive door. It was the first time Hollywood looked his way. For the first time, someone powerful said, "I see you." That wasn't just a break, it was oxygen. From that moment, Chris Rock wasn't just chasing a dream. He was running with proof that his pain, persistence, and raw voice mattered. And although the world didn't know it yet, comedy had just found its next revolutionary truth-teller. 3. Saturday Night Live, fame pressure, and the comedy battlefield. When Chris Rock joined Saturday Night Live in 1990, it felt like the dream had finally arrived. He had gone from sleeping on trains and working dead-end jobs to performing on the most iconic comedy stage in America. Millions watched every week. The lights were bright, the cameras were brutal, and every word spoken on live television could make or break a career. For most people, this would feel like victory, but for Chris Rock, SNL was not paradise. It was a war zone. The pressure inside Studio 8H was relentless. The writer's room was a battlefield filled with cigarette smoke, crumpled scripts, caffeine, and anxiety. You didn't just write jokes, you fought for them. If your sketch didn't make the cut, you didn't appear on screen. If you didn't appear on screen, you were forgotten. Silence was worse than failure. You either kill or you die, Chris once confessed. And most of us died before we learned how to kill. Yet inside this chaos, there was a brotherhood. Chris found himself surrounded by a group of young comedy rebels who would later dominate Hollywood. Adam Sandler, Rob Schneider, David Spade, and the explosive force of nature known as Chris Farley. They called themselves the bad boys of SNL. They were fearless, outrageous, and willing to risk everything for a laugh. They stayed up until 4 a.m. writing sketches, then returned at 6 a.m. to rehearse. They survived on junk food adrenaline and the desperate belief that laughter could buy them another week on the show. Each of them had a different style. Sandler was goofy but smart. Spade was sarcastic with razor-sharp timing. Schneider was a master of characters. Farley was pure chaos, loud, fearless, and willing to throw himself through a table to get a laugh. But Rock was different. He wasn't just silly, he was dangerously honest. He wanted to talk about race, society, injustice. He wanted to tell the truth even if it made people uncomfortable. That made him powerful, but it also made him a target. Behind the scenes, he often felt sidelined. Sketches that leaned into his sharp social commentary were rejected or toned down. His airtime was limited. At times, he felt invisible in a show he fought so hard to reach. The crowd saw glamour. He saw politics. He later admitted he felt like a black man fenced in by polite comedy. He was funny, but not always allowed to be himself. Meanwhile, Chris Farley was burning bright and burning out. On screen, Farley was electric. His physical comedy was unmatched, his joy infectious. Off-screen, he battled loneliness, insecurity, and addiction. He was the loudest laugh in the room, but also the one hiding the most pain. Rock loved him deeply. Farley could make the world laugh, he said softly years later, but he couldn't stop his own tears. The world saw a star. Rock saw a friend slowly breaking. The longer Rock stayed at SNL, the more he realized fame didn't mean freedom. He was known, but not fulfilled. He was visible, but still voiceless. "You don't make it in this business," he said. you survive it. And SNL was survival at its purest form. In 1993, after 3 grueling seasons, his contract ended. There was no grand celebration, no emotional farewell. One chapter simply closed and silence rushed back in. He left with no guaranteed future, just a fragile reputation and a burning need to reclaim his voice. Many thought his career might fade. Instead, leaving SNL became the turning point of his life. Because pain has always been Chris Rock's fuel. And the very battlefield that nearly broke him became the fire that forged his greatest weapon, truth. He walked away from the biggest stage in comedy so he could finally speak without fear. And soon, the world would hear him louder than ever before. 4. Stand-up revolution. Bring the pain. Global stardom and the cost of greatness. After leaving SNL, many believed Chris Rock's career had peaked, but his greatest rise was still ahead. He returned to the stage with something far more dangerous than fame, nothing left to lose. In 1996, he unleashed Bring the Pain, a stand-up special that didn't just entertain, it shook America. He confronted race politics and truth with a fearless honesty no comedian had ever dared. The special won 2 Emmy Awards and instantly crowned him the new king of stand-up. But success can be a prison. After Bring the Pain, everyone expected him to top perfection. The pressure was suffocating. Still, he delivered again with Bigger and Blacker 1999 and Never Scared 2004, blending razor-sharp insight with explosive humor. Audiences roared, critics praised, but behind the scenes, each special drained him. Every joke had to be smarter. Every performance had to be legendary. When they call you the best, he admitted, you stop sleeping because what if they find out you're not? At the same time, he launched The Chris Rock Show, proving he was more than a stand-up comic, he was a cultural voice. He grilled politicians, exposed hypocrisy, and used comedy to reveal uncomfortable truths. It won him another Emmy, but also more pressure. He was no longer just funny, he was important. And being important is heavy. Then he turned pain into art again with Everybody Hates Chris, 2005 to 2009, a series based on his childhood. The world laughed, but the story was built on trauma. He relived his past every episode, rewriting memories that once broke him. From the outside, it looked like victory. Inside, it felt like warfare. Fame gave him power but stole his peace. The louder the applause got, the lonelier the silence became. 5. Death, Grief, and Brotherhood. The losses that shaped his soul. Behind Chris Rock's fearless comedy is a lifetime of grief that never truly healed. His tragedies did not strike all at once, they arrived in painful waves, each one cutting deeper than the last. The first and most devastating loss came in 1988, when his father, Julius Rock, entered the hospital for what was supposed to be a routine ulcer surgery. Chris didn't worry, his father had survived poverty, racism, and decades of back-breaking labor. But fate was cruel. Julius passed away at 56 years old, leaving Chris shattered at only 23. He rushed to the hospital too late, staring at the still hands of the man who taught him strength through sacrifice. The provider, the protector, the quiet hero of their family, gone without a goodbye. Chris later confessed, "When my dad died, part of me died too. That moment changed him forever. Every joke after that carried a shadow." Years later, another wound opened, this time slower and more silent. His half-brother Charles Rock battled alcoholism for years, hiding pain behind pride. He wasn't famous, he didn't seek attention. But his struggles were real. In 2006, at 52, Charles lost his fight. Unlike his father's sudden death, this one felt like watching someone drown in slow motion. Chris didn't speak publicly about it. It hurt too much. Grief didn't scream. It whispered. But the universe wasn't done testing him. During his time at Saturday Night Live, Chris formed a brotherhood with fellow comics none closer than Chris Farley. Farley was wild energy on stage, but off stage he suffered deeply. Addiction consumed him. On December 18, 1997, Farley died at 33 from an overdose. Rock said Farley was the funniest man I ever knew, and maybe the saddest. Losing him felt like losing a piece of his youth. Then came 2008. Another blow, another brother. Bernie Mac, a legend in black comedy and a mentor to Rock, passed away unexpectedly at 50 due to pneumonia complications. Bernie wasn't just funny, he carried dignity, pride, and wisdom. At his funeral, Chris broke down. We didn't just lose a man. We lost a giant. Father, brother, best friend, mentor. One by one, the strongest men in his life disappeared. These losses didn't just hurt, they transformed him. His comedy grew deeper, his pauses longer, his honesty sharper. He learned that laughter can't erase pain, but it can honor the memory of those who helped shape you. 6. Love, marriage, and the silent collapse of a 19-year relationship. After surviving poverty, racism, and heartbreak, Chris Rock believed he had finally found peace when he met Malak Compton in 1994. She wasn't part of Hollywood. She was calm, grounded, and real. While the world chased spotlights, she brought stillness. 2 years later, in 1996, they married in a quiet ceremony without media. For the first time, Chris didn't have to perform. He could simply exist. Their home in Alpine, New Jersey became a sanctuary away from flashing cameras and chaotic tours. Mornings were slow coffee conversation, laughter in the kitchen. He wasn't Chris Rock the superstar. He was just a husband. A man who had finally escaped the noise. Everything changed when their first daughter, Lola Simone, was born in 2002. He held her in his arms and felt something success had never given him purpose. 2 years later, they welcomed Zara Savannah. Fatherhood transformed him. He rushed home between shows just to read bedtime stories. He pushed strollers through Central Park, blending into the crowd with a baseball cap and pure joy. My daughters, he said, are the only standing ovations I need. But success has a dark side. As his career exploded with global tours, TV deals, and film projects, the schedule became brutal. He was gone for weeks. The distance wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Conversations faded. Laughter in the kitchen turned into silence at the dinner table. Malak focused on her humanitarian work, helping women rebuild their lives while quietly losing her husband to fame. Then came the breaking point. Chris later admitted he betrayed her trust, saying, "I wasn't a good husband. That's nobody's fault but mine." Infidelity was only part of the story. The deeper issue was avoidance. Instead of facing problems, he hid behind jokes, work, and ego. They tried therapy. They tried patience. But love, when neglected, weakens quietly. After 19 years, they announced their separation in 2014. The divorce was finalized in 2016. No public fighting, no tabloids, just sorrow wrapped in dignity. Even in pain, they chose respect. They shared custody of their daughters. Chris bought a house just minutes away. He refused to be a weekend dad. He showed up to recital school events and late-night talks. He rebuilt his life not on fame, but on presence. He once said with a trembling voice, "It's easy to make the world laugh. It's hard to stay kind at home." The tragedy isn't that the marriage ended. The tragedy is how hard he fought the world, but didn't know how to fight for love until it was too late. 7. The Oscar slap. One moment that shook the world and tested his grace. March 27, 2022. The Dolby Theater glowed with gold and glamour, the world watching the prestigious Academy Awards. Chris Rock stood on stage, confident and charismatic, delivering jokes with the ease of a master. This was routine for him: live crowds, bright lights, endless pressure. But in one unforgettable moment, everything changed. He made a light-hearted remark about Jada Pinkett Smith's shaved head, referencing G.I. Jane. The audience chuckled. Jada rolled her eyes. What followed felt unreal. Will Smith, once known as the charming Fresh Prince, suddenly rose from his seat and walked toward the stage with a cold expression. Before anyone understood what was happening, he struck Chris across the face with an open-handed slap. The sound echoed louder than any punchline. The room froze. Millions watched in shock. Billions would replay it. Chris stood still, but didn't fall. He blinked, steadied himself, and unbelievably continued the show. No anger, no retaliation, just professionalism under fire. That restraint was not weakness, it was power. It was discipline earned from a lifetime of surviving pain. Back in his seat, Will yelled, "Keep my wife's name out of your mouth." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. The moment instantly became one of the most shocking events in television history. It overshadowed every winner that night. The internet exploded. Media debated endlessly. Who was right? Who was wrong? Late-night shows, news channels, podcasts, everyone had an opinion. But one person remained silent. Chris Rock. He refused interviews. He didn't sue. He didn't humiliate Will in return. He waited. Behind the scenes, his younger brother Tony Rock couldn't stay quiet. Furious, he publicly defended Chris at his comedy shows, calling out Will Smith directly. He spoke with pain, not hatred, but headlines twisted his words. Suddenly, the Rock family was dragged into a storm they didn't start. Months passed. The Academy banned Will Smith for 10 years. Will apologized repeatedly, calling the moment a scar for life. But Chris stayed silent until 2023. In his Netflix live special, Selective Outrage, he finally addressed the slap. Not with bitterness, but with brilliance. He turned humiliation into art, trauma into truth, and the audience roared with respect. He proved that grace is stronger than violence. This scandal wasn't just entertainment, it was a mirror to the world. It tested character, it revealed pain, and it showed that even when struck on the biggest stage in the world, Chris Rock refused to break. 8. At 60. Legacy, healing fatherhood, and the peace he fought to earn. At 60, Chris Rock stands at a place few entertainers ever reach, not just fame, but deep understanding. After decades of public triumphs and private heartbreak, he has transformed pain into wisdom. He no longer chases applause. He chases peace. His greatest pride isn't awards, money, or legacy. It's his daughters Lola Simone and Zara Savannah. Lola, now 23, is studying in Paris, embracing culture and independence. Zara, 21, follows in her mother Malak Compton's footsteps, working in humanitarian causes and community service. Chris once said, "My daughters are the only ovations that matter." He calls them every night, no matter where he is in the world. Even after divorce, Malak's influence remains visible through the compassion and strength their daughters carry. His net worth, estimated at $60 million, reflects decades of hard work, but material success is no longer his measure of life. He keeps his home in Alpine, New Jersey, not for luxury but for quiet mornings, meditation, and clarity. Fame once kept him moving nonstop. Now stillness is his reward. Yet he hasn't stopped creating. In 2024, he returned as narrator and executive producer of Everybody Still Hates Chris, an animated revival of the series that shaped a generation. The show blends humor and honesty, proving his story still matters. He is also developing a personal film project, acting, directing, and writing his most introspective work yet. He continues stand-up in small clubs with no cameras, just raw truth. He donates millions, quietly mentors younger comedians, and uses his voice to uplift rather than shock. The tragedy of Chris Rock isn't that he suffered, it's that he survived so much and still chooses love, growth, and grace. At 60, he is no longer defined by pain. He is defined by how he turned it into purpose. At 60, Chris Rock's life is a reminder that even legends bleed behind the spotlight. He turned trauma into comedy, heartbreak into growth, and public humiliation into dignity. He survived poverty, grief, divorce, and the Oscars scandal, yet still stands with grace and truth. His greatest legacy isn't laughter, but resilience. And now the question remains, was Chris Rock celebrated for his brilliance, or ignored in his pain until it became entertainment? Share your thoughts below. Does the world truly value honesty, or only when it's funny?